2 billion people prayed today. 2 billion. Not last year, not last month. Today. This morning, a Muslim in Jakarta pressed his forehead to the ground. This afternoon, a Catholic grandmother in Sao Paulo held rosary beads between arthritic fingers. This evening, a Hindu woman in Mumbai lit incense before an image of Ganesh. Right now, a Buddhist monk in Chiang Mai sits in stillness. A Pentecostal preacher in Lagos raises his hands. A Jewish father in Tel Aviv murmurs Hebrew into the Western Wall. A Sufi in Istanbul spins with arms outstretched, all doing the same thing, directing consciousness at something they cannot see, believing the act of asking changes something. That thought's directed at the invisible produce effects in the visible. 2 billion people did this today, and tomorrow 2 billion will do it again. This is the most persistent human behavior in history, more persistent than war or agriculture or science. Every civilization has prayed, every culture on every continent in every century. Neanderthals buried their dead with ritual. The behavior might be older than Homo sapiens, older than language, and this behavior has survived every attempt to eliminate it. Soviet atheism tried for 70 years, failed. Chinese communism tried for decades, failed. Scientific materialism has spent 4 centuries demonstrating the universe runs on mechanism, not intention. Prayer persists. The Enlightenment declared reason supreme. Prayer persists. Neuroscience mapped the brain and found no transcendent receiver. Prayer persists. Why? Why does this behavior persist? What is it about human consciousness that produces this universal compulsion to direct awareness at the invisible and expect the visible to change? The standard scientific answer is simple. Prayer is superstition, magical thinking. Your brain evolved to detect agents, predators in the bushes, minds behind events. This hyperactive agent detection system had, as cognitive scientists like Justin Barrett call it, produces the universal tendency to see intention behind randomness, gods behind nature. Prayer is the behavioral expression of this cognitive bias. You pray because evolution made you assume the universe is populated by minds. This explanation is elegant, parsimonious, and possibly wrong. Not certainly wrong, possibly wrong. Because there is a feature of quantum mechanics that the standard debunking of prayer does not account for. A feature so strange and so well confirmed that it has been unsettling physicists for 90 years. A feature that says exactly what prayer claims. That consciousness directed at reality changes reality. That observation alters what is observed. That the act of paying attention to a quantum system changes the behavior of that quantum system. That mind affects matter, not metaphorically, not spiritually, physically, measurably, reproducibly, in every laboratory on Earth. The observer effect. Let me be precise about what the observer effect says, because precision matters here, and imprecision has led to decades of misunderstanding. In quantum mechanics, a particle does not have definite properties until measured. This is not a statement about human ignorance, not a confession that our instruments are too crude. This is a statement about reality itself. An electron does not have a definite position until you look for its position. Before you look, the electron is not in a specific place that you happen not to know about. The electron is genuinely in multiple places simultaneously. A photon does not have a definite polarization until you measure its polarization. Before measurement, the photon is genuinely polarized in multiple directions at once. A radioactive atom does not have a definite state decayed or not decayed until something detects whether it has decayed. Before detection, the atom is genuinely both decayed and not decayed simultaneously. Schrödinger designed his famous thought experiment specifically to show how absurd this is. A cat that is simultaneously alive and dead. He meant it as reductio ad absurdum, as proof that something must be wrong with quantum mechanics. But the experiments confirmed the absurdity. Superposition is real. has been demonstrated with photons, electrons, atoms, molecules, and objects containing over 2,000 atoms. The mathematics is unambiguous. The wave function describes a genuine superposition of possibilities. Not ignorance of a definite state, genuine indefiniteness. The particle is not somewhere and you do not know where. The particle is everywhere and nowhere. Simultaneously, until observation, until measurement, until something interacts with the particle and forces it to choose, to collapse from all possibilities into one actuality, from superposition into definite state, from the many into the one, from maybe to is. This is the most confirmed fact in physics, confirmed to more decimal places than any other scientific theory in history. Quantum electrodynamics. The quantum theory of light and matter predicts the anomalous magnetic moment of the electron to an accuracy of 1 part in 10 trillion. 10 trillion. No other theory in any science has ever achieved this precision, and quantum electrodynamics is built entirely on the superposition principle, on the reality of quantum states existing in multiple configurations simultaneously until measured. The double-slit experiment demonstrates it directly. Thomas Young first performed it with light in 1801, but the quantum version is far stranger. In 1961, Claus Janssen performed it with electrons. Single electrons fired one at a time at a barrier with 2 slits. Each electron passed through both slits simultaneously and interfered with itself, produced an interference pattern that built up 1 electron at a time, a single particle in 2 places at once. In 1999, Markus Arndt and Anton Zeilinger at the University of Vienna demonstrated superposition with C60 fullerene molecules, buckyballs, 60 carbon atoms arranged in a soccer ball shape, objects large enough to see under an electron microscope. Each molecule passed through both slits simultaneously. In 2019, the same group achieved superposition with molecules containing over 2,000 atoms. Objects with a mass of over 25,000 atomic mass units behaving as waves, passing through 2 locations at once. The boundary between quantum and classical keeps retreating. Every time physicists test whether larger objects can be in superposition, the answer is yes. When you do not observe which slit the particle passes through, it passes through both simultaneously and produces an interference pattern on the detector screen. Bright bands where the 2 paths constructively interfere, dark bands where they destructively interfere. The pattern is unmistakable, mathematical, precise, exactly what wave mechanics predicts for a wave passing through 2 openings. But when you place a detector at one of the slits to observe which path the particle takes, the interference pattern disappears, instantly, completely. The particle behaves as a particle, not a wave, passes through one slit or the other, never both. The act of observation changes the physical behavior of the particle, not subtly, categorically, from wave to particle, from both paths to one path, from superposition to definite state. The quantum eraser experiments demonstrate something even stranger. In 1999, Yoon Ho Kim and colleagues performed the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment at the University of Maryland. They created entangled photon pairs. One photon went through a double slit. The other went to a detector that could either record which path information or erase it. When which path information was available, the interference pattern disappeared. When it was erased, the interference pattern returned. The decision to erase or preserve the information could be made after the first photon had already hit the screen. The future measurement retroactively determined whether the past photon behaved as wave or particle, causation running backward in time, observation reaching into the past. John Wheeler proposed the cosmic version. His delayed choice thought experiment imagined light from a distant quasar being gravitationally lensed by an intervening galaxy. The photon travels both paths around the galaxy simultaneously, in superposition. Billions of years later on Earth, an astronomer decides whether to observe which path the photon took, or to combine the paths, and look for interference. The astronomer's decision today determines whether the photon traveled one path or both paths billions of years ago. In 2007, Vincent Jacques and colleagues at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris confirmed Wheeler's prediction experimentally with single photons. The observation made now determined the behavior of the photon in the past. In 2015, Andrew Manning and colleagues at the Australian National University extended the experiment and confirmed it with atoms. Observation is not constrained by time. Observation reaches backward. The quantum Zeno effect demonstrates that continuous observation prevents quantum state change. In 1990, Wayne Itano and colleagues at NIST used beryllium ions in an electromagnetic trap. The ions were prepared in one energy state and should have transitioned to a higher state through absorption of radio frequency radiation. Without observation, the transition occurred normally. With intermittent observation, the transition was slowed. With rapid repeated observation, 64 measurements in 256 milliseconds, the transition was almost completely suppressed. The ions remained frozen in their initial state. Measured continuously, they could not change. The quantum watch pot that never boils, confirmed in a government laboratory with trapped ions and published in Physical Review, A. Now here is the question that no physicist wants to answer. What counts as observation? What counts as measurement? What is special about the interaction that collapses the wave function? Is it any physical interaction? Or is it specifically an interaction that produces information accessible to a conscious observer? Most physicists say any physical interaction will do. Decoherence, the interaction of a quantum system with its environment, produces the appearance of collapse without requiring consciousness. When a photon hits a detector, the detector's many particles interact with the photon and the quantum coherence is destroyed. No consciousness required, just physics, just particles interacting with particles. The observer is irrelevant, consciousness is irrelevant. The measurement problem is solved without invoking mind. But decoherence does not actually solve the measurement problem. This is widely misunderstood. Decoherence explains why you do not see superposition at the macroscopic level. When a quantum system interacts with its environment, the quantum coherence is destroyed in fractions of a femtosecond. The environment absorbs the quantum information. This is why the classical world looks classical. But decoherence does not explain why one particular outcome occurs rather than another, does not explain why the electron went left rather than right. Decoherence separates the branches, makes the alternatives unable to interfere, but it does not select one alternative as actual. It decoheres the wave function into multiple non-interfering branches. In each branch, an observer sees a definite outcome, but the other branches still exist in the mathematics. Decoherence produces the appearance of collapse. It does not explain why you are in this branch. It does not explain the first-person experience of seeing one result. The measurement problem is not solved, not by decoherence, not by any interpretation, not by any formalism. The role of the observer is not explained. The question of what produces definite experience from quantum possibility remains the deepest open question in physics. And the question has a structure that is disturbingly similar to the structure of prayer. In both cases, consciousness is directed at a system. In both cases, the claim is that the direction of consciousness changes the system. In both cases, the mechanism is unknown. In both cases, the effect is undeniable, something happens, but unexplained, nobody knows how. But here is where prayer goes beyond mere observation. And this is the point most people miss when they talk about quantum mechanics and consciousness. The observer effect says observation changes the system, collapses the superposition into a definite state, but observation alone does not determine which state. Observation selects one outcome from the set of possible outcomes. The electron goes left or right. The photon is detected here or there. The atom decays or does not, but which outcome? Standard quantum mechanics says the selection is random. weighted by probabilities that the Born rule calculates from the wave function, but random. No direction, no preference, no intention, just dice. Prayer is not mere observation. Prayer is observation with content, observation with direction, observation with a specific desired outcome. When a mother prays for her sick child, she is not merely observing the child's quantum state. She is directing consciousness at the child's quantum state with the specific intention that the state collapse toward health rather than disease. That the billions of quantum events occurring in the child's cells every microsecond land on the side of healing rather than deterioration. She is not rolling dice, she is loading dice, or trying to. Henry Stapp, the theoretical physicist at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, built a rigorous framework for exactly this. His model, published in multiple papers in Physical Review and Foundations of Physics between 1993 and 2017, starts from orthodox quantum mechanics. Von Neumann's formulation, the most mathematically rigorous version of quantum theory. Von Neumann identified three processes in quantum mechanics. Process 1 is the choice of which question to ask of nature, which measurement to perform, which observable to observe. Process 2 is the deterministic evolution of the wave function between measurements, the Schrödinger equation. Process 3 is the probabilistic outcome, the collapse, the selection of one result from the possible results with probabilities given by the Born rule. Here is Stapp's key insight. Process 1, the choice of which question to ask, is not described by any equation in quantum mechanics. The Schrödinger equation describes process 2. The Born rule describes process 3. Nothing in the formalism describes process 1. The choice of what to measure is left outside the mathematics. It is an input to the theory, not an output. Physics tells you what will happen once you decide what to measure. Physics does not tell you what to decide to measure. That choice is free, undetermined by the equations, and that choice matters enormously. Because different measurement choices lead to different outcomes, different questions get different answers. The choice of what to observe determines the set of possible results, and therefore determines which reality actualizes. This is where intention enters quantum mechanics, not as mysticism, not as violation of physical law, as process 1, the conscious choice of which question to ask, which aspect of the quantum system to attend to, which observable to observe. When you observe a quantum system, you must choose what to observe: position or momentum, spin up down or spin left right, energy or time. Each choice collapses the system differently, produces a different set of possible outcomes, selects a different aspect of reality to make definite. Prayer in Stapp's framework is process 1, applied with intention. The prayer does not merely observe reality passively. The prayer chooses what to observe, chooses which aspect of reality to attend to, chooses which question to ask of the quantum system. And the choice, the intention, the direction of consciousness determines which set of outcomes becomes possible. Not which specific outcome occurs, that remains probabilistic, but which set of outcomes is available. And that is not nothing. That is everything. Because choosing which question to ask is choosing which answers are possible. And choosing which answers are possible is shaping reality. Combined with the quantum Zeno effect, the framework becomes even more powerful. Stapp showed that if consciousness holds a specific intention, holds a specific neural template in attention through repeated process 1 choices, the Zeno effect stabilizes that template, prevents it from decohering, keeps the intended state alive in the brain's quantum processes. The intention persists. The desired neural pattern is maintained against the natural tendency of quantum states to evolve away. Attention holds the intention in place, the way continuous observation holds a quantum state in place. And the longer the attention is sustained, the more stable the intended pattern becomes. The more likely the brain is to act on the intended pattern rather than on competing patterns. The intention becomes action. The prayer becomes reality. Not because physics was violated, because consciousness exercised its role in process 1, chose which question to ask, held the question through the Zeno effect, and let the quantum mechanics do the rest. This is not the secret. Not wishing makes it so. Not think positive thoughts and the universe delivers. This is a specific physical mechanism operating within the formalism of orthodox quantum mechanics. Consciousness selects the measurement. The Zeno effect stabilizes the selection. The Born rule determines the probability of each outcome within the selected measurement. The outcome is still probabilistic, but the probability distribution has been shaped by the conscious choice of what to measure, by the intention, by the prayer. The prayer does not override physics. The prayer uses a degree of freedom that physics explicitly leaves open, the choice of what to observe. And that choice, that tiny crack in the deterministic machinery, that one degree of freedom that the equations do not determine, is where prayer lives, where intention operates, where the desire of the mother for her child's healing enters the quantum mechanics and shapes not the outcome but the probability landscape from which the outcome is drawn. Let me be honest about what I am not saying. Completely honest. Because this territory is littered with charlatans and con artists and people who use quantum mechanics as a magic word to sell healing crystals and manifestation courses and pseudo-scientific garbage. I am not one of them. And what I am about to argue is not what they argue. I am not saying that prayer works because of quantum mechanics. I am not saying that closing your eyes and asking God for a promotion collapses wave functions in your boss's brain. I am not saying that you can manifest a parking space through quantum intention. I am not saying that the secret is scientifically valid, or that law of attraction is quantum physics, or that wishing makes it so. I am not saying that quantum mechanics proves God exists, or that prayer reaches a divine listener, or that the universe is designed to respond to human requests. These would be extraordinary claims requiring extraordinary evidence, and I do not have that evidence. Nobody does. What I am saying is more subtle and more important and more honest. The structure of prayer and the structure of quantum observation share features that are not coincidental. Both involve consciousness directed at a system. Both claim the direction of consciousness changes the system. Both involve a gap between the determined and the actual that something must fill. And both have been dismissed by materialists as superstition or irrelevance when in fact neither is understood. Prayer is not understood. The observer effect is not understood. And the two things that are not understood have the same shape, the same structure, the same architecture of consciousness meeting reality and something changing. And now the experiments, because this is not just philosophy, not just structural parallels and suggestive analogies. There are experiments, controversial experiments, debated experiments. Experiments that many scientists wish had never been conducted because the results are uncomfortable, but experiments. Real experiments with real controls and real data. In 1988, Randolph Bird, a cardiologist at San Francisco General Hospital, published a study in the Southern Medical Journal. He randomly assigned 393 coronary care unit patients to receive intercessory prayer or no prayer. Double-blind. Neither patients nor staff knew who was in which group. Born-again Christians prayed for the prayer group by name daily. The prayed-for group had significantly fewer complications, needed less antibiotics, had fewer episodes of pulmonary edema, required less intubation. The results were statistically significant, published in a peer-reviewed journal, a real study. 10 years later, Elizabeth Targ, a psychiatrist at the University of California, San Francisco, took it further. She conducted a double-blind, randomized controlled trial of distant prayer on AIDS patients. 40 patients were randomly assigned to receive distant prayer from experienced healers or no prayer. Neither the patients nor the doctors knew who was in which group. The healers were given only the patients' first names and photographs. They prayed from hundreds of miles away, had no physical contact with the patients, no telephone calls, No emails, no communication of any kind, just consciousness directed at a photograph with the intention of healing. The results were striking. The prayed-for group had significantly fewer AIDS-related illnesses, fewer hospitalizations, fewer doctor visits, and lower severity of illness. The results were published in the Western Journal of Medicine, a peer-reviewed journal at a major university, a real study with real controls and real statistical significance. But the criticism is serious and must be stated honestly. Small sample size, possible confounders. The primary endpoint was changed after the data was collected, which is a red flag in clinical research. And replication has been inconsistent. Some studies find effects of distant prayer, others do not. The largest and most rigorous study on prayer was the Stapp trial in 2006, study of the therapeutic effects of intercessory prayer, funded by the Templeton Foundation, 1,802 cardiac bypass patients. 3 groups: prayed for and told they might be prayed for, not prayed for and told they might be prayed for, prayed for and told they were definitely being prayed for. The results: no benefit of prayer for the first 2 groups, and the group that knew they were being prayed for did slightly worse, possibly due to performance anxiety. The worry that I must be really sick if people are praying for me. The largest prayer study in history found prayer did not work, or did not work the way the study was designed to detect. And this is where it gets interesting, because the failure of the Stapp trial might not mean prayer does not work. It might mean the study measured prayer wrong. The healers in Targ's study were experienced contemplatives, people who had spent decades training their consciousness. The intercessors in the Stapp trial were members of church congregations asked to pray for strangers. The quality of consciousness directed was completely different. The depth of focus, the intensity of attention. The years of training. If quantum mechanics tells us that the quality of observation matters, that weak measurement produces different results than strong measurement, then the quality of prayer might matter too. A monk who has meditated for 30 years might direct consciousness with a precision and intensity that a well-meaning but untrained person simply cannot match. Testing prayer by asking random congregants to add a stranger's name to their prayer list might be like testing whether observation collapses the wave function by having someone glance at the apparatus while walking past. The glance is technically observation, but it is not the kind of observation that matters. But the very existence of the experiments is significant. Think about what it means that you can design a double-blind, randomized, controlled trial of prayer. It means prayer makes a testable claim, an empirical claim, a claim about the physical world that is not immune to experiment. The claim is that consciousness directed at a distant person by a person who has no physical contact with them, no telephone calls, no emails, no carrier pigeons, no mechanism of influence through any known physical channel, produces measurable changes in the distant person's physical condition. This is an extraordinary claim, and it has exactly the same structure as quantum non-locality, exactly the same structure as entanglement, exactly the same structure as Bell test violations. Correlated changes between spatially separated systems with no mechanism to explain the correlation through any local physical cause. When Aspect tested Bell's inequality in 1982, he found correlated changes between spatially separated photons with no local mechanism to explain the correlation. Physics accepted this as real, gave him a Nobel Prize for it in 2022. When prayer researchers find correlated changes between spatially separated persons with no local mechanism to explain the correlation, physics rejects this as impossible. The structure is identical. Non-local correlation without local mechanism. The reaction is opposite. Because one fits within accepted theory and the other does not. But the history of science is the history of impossible things becoming accepted theory. Every major advance in physics began as something the existing framework said was impossible. Relativity was impossible before Einstein. Quantum mechanics was impossible before Planck. Entanglement was impossible before Bell. The impossibility of today might be the physics of tomorrow, or it might be genuine impossibility. We do not know, and the honest position is to acknowledge that we do not know rather than to dismiss what we have not explained. Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences has conducted decades of experiments on consciousness and quantum mechanics that push the boundary between physics and what most physicists consider impossible. In his double-slit experiments, he asked meditators to direct their attention at a double-slit apparatus, not to touch it, not to blow on it, not to interact with it in any physically measurable way, just to focus their minds on it, to direct their consciousness at the apparatus with the intention of influencing the interference pattern. When the meditators focused their attention on the apparatus, the interference pattern shifted. The degree of shift correlated with the meditator's self-reported depth of concentration. When they withdrew attention, the pattern returned to normal. When they directed attention again, the pattern shifted again. The effect was small, tiny by the standards of normal physics, but statistically significant across multiple replications over multiple years in multiple laboratories. In 2012, Radin published results showing that meditators with more experience produced larger effects. Across 6 experiments conducted between 2000 and 2012, the combined statistical significance reached 5.7 sigma. In particle physics, 5 sigma is the threshold for discovery, the threshold at which physicists declared the Higgs boson found. Radin's combined results exceed this threshold. The individual experiments range from 2.2 to 3.8 sigma. Small individually, large collectively, and the effect correlated with meditation experience in a dose-response relationship. More years of practice produced larger shifts, less experience produced smaller shifts. No meditation experience produced no shift. This is exactly what you would expect if the mechanism connecting consciousness to quantum systems is real, but depends on the quality of the consciousness directed. Exactly what contemplative traditions have said for millennia. That trained consciousness is different from untrained consciousness. That the master's prayer is different from the novice's prayer. That practice matters. That depth matters. That the quality of attention is as important as the fact of attention. These results are not accepted by mainstream physics. The effect sizes are small. The theoretical framework is lacking. Many physicists dismiss the work as methodologically flawed or statistically misleading. The criticism has force. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the evidence, while intriguing, is not extraordinary. Not yet. Not by the standards of physics, where extraordinary means confirmed to 12 decimal places. The evidence is at the level of interesting anomaly, not confirmed fact. But consider the full spectrum. At one end, the observer effect, confirmed beyond doubt. In the middle, Radin's experiments, small but statistically significant, debated but replicated. At the other end, prayer experiments, inconsistent but sometimes significant, 3 points on a single spectrum of consciousness interacting with physical reality. The structure is identical throughout. Consciousness directed at a system. The system changes. Nobody knows how. And contemplative tradition says the quality of consciousness matters. That the monk directs consciousness with precision the casual prayer cannot access. Quantum mechanics says the same. Weak measurement differs from strong measurement. The parallels are structural, precise, and deeply unsettling. In part 2, we go deeper into quantum non-locality and the universal prayer claim that distance does not matter, into the neuroscience of prayer and why the brain in deep prayer optimizes for quantum observation, into the quantum vacuum and how directed intention might interact with the foundation of reality, and into the most radical possibility. That prayer works not because God is listening from outside, but because the universe is participatory, because consciousness is woven into reality's foundation, and prayer is the oldest human expression of this. The feature physics calls the measurement problem, and religion calls God. Every prayer tradition on earth makes the same extraordinary claim. Distance does not matter. The Muslim praying in Jakarta and the Muslim praying in Mecca are equally heard by God. Not the Jakarta Muslim is heard less, because he is farther from the Kaaba. Equally, the Christian in a prison cell in North Korea and the Christian in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome are equally close to the divine. Not the prisoner is at a disadvantage because he has no church. Equally close. The Buddhist monk meditating in a cave in the Himalayas and the Buddhist sitting on a park bench in Tokyo are equally connected to the ground of being. Not the monk has better reception because he is at altitude. Equally connected. The Hindu woman praying at a roadside shrine in a village with no electricity and the Hindu priest performing elaborate ritual in the most ornate temple in Varanasi direct their consciousness at the same Brahman with equal access. Not the priest has a better signal because his temple is grander. Equal access. The Sufi mystic says, "There is no distance between you and God because God is closer to you than your jugular vein." The Quran says it explicitly. We are closer to him than his jugular vein. Quran 50-16, not metaphorically, a statement about the structure of reality. God is not far. God is not in a place that prayer must travel to. God is here, everywhere, always, closer than close. And your prayer does not need to cross distance because there is no distance to cross. Every tradition says this. Every tradition, across every continent and every century. The claim is universal, and the claim is identical. Consciousness directed at the transcendent is not attenuated by distance, does not weaken with separation, does not fade with miles. A prayer from the far side of the earth is not quieter than a prayer from next door. The connection between the one who prays and the one who hears is not spatial, is not physical, is not subject to the inverse square law that governs every other interaction in the physical universe. Light dims with distance, sound fades with distance, gravity weakens with distance. Every force, every field, every signal, every physical influence in the known universe decreases with distance. Except according to every prayer tradition that has ever existed, the connection between consciousness and the divine. This sounds like superstition. Like exactly the kind of claim that physics should dismiss. That distance does not matter, violates everything we know about physical interactions. Every force carrier in the Standard Model propagates through space and is affected by distance. Photons spread, gravitons weaken, gluons are confined. W and Z bosons decay within femtometers. Nothing in physics operates without regard to distance. Except one thing, quantum entanglement. In 1935, Einstein, Podolsky and Rosen published a paper arguing that quantum mechanics must be incomplete. Their argument depended on a phenomenon that Einstein called spooky action at a distance. When two particles are entangled, measuring one instantly determines the state of the other, regardless of the distance between them, not after a delay. Instantly. Not approximately. Exactly. Not weakened by distance. At full strength, whether the particles are separated by a millimeter or a million light years. The correlation between entangled particles is not attenuated by distance, is not weakened by separation, does not fade with miles, does not obey the inverse square law, does not respect the speed of light as a maximum speed of influence. The connection is non-local, instantaneous, distance independent. Einstein thought this proved quantum mechanics was wrong, that no reasonable theory of physics could allow instantaneous distance, independent correlations. He called it spooky because he believed it was absurd. He spent the last 30 years of his life trying to find an alternative. a local hidden variable theory that would reproduce the predictions of quantum mechanics without the spookiness. He failed. In 1964, John Bell proved mathematically that no local theory could reproduce the predictions of quantum mechanics, that any theory respecting locality would produce correlations below a specific numerical threshold, and quantum mechanics predicted correlations above the threshold. The difference was testable. In 1982, Alain Aspect in a laboratory in Paris confirmed Bell's prediction experimentally. He measured polarization correlations between pairs of photons flying in opposite directions, changed the measurement settings while the photons were in flight so that no signal traveling at the speed of light could communicate the change from one detector to the other. The correlations violated Bell's inequality massively, consistently, repeatedly. The correlations were real, non-local, instantaneous, distance independent, not approximately distance independent. Exactly. Experiments have been performed with photons separated by over 1,000 kilometers using the Maisha satellite. The correlations do not weaken, do not fade, do not diminish. 1,000 kilometers produces the same correlation as a millimeter. In 2022, Aspect, along with John Clauser and Anton Zeilinger, received the Nobel Prize in Physics for proving that quantum entanglement is real and that local realism is false. That spooky action at a distance is not a theoretical curiosity, but a confirmed fundamental feature of physical reality. Let me state the parallel precisely. Because precision matters here, and sloppy parallels are worse than no parallels. Prayer claims that consciousness directed at the transcendent operates independently of distance. Quantum entanglement confirms that correlated quantum systems operate independently of distance. Prayer claims that the connection between the one who prays and the one who hears is not spatial. Quantum entanglement confirms that the connection between entangled particles is not spatial. Prayer claims that separation does not weaken the connection. Quantum entanglement confirms that separation does not weaken the correlation. Prayer claims that the connection is instantaneous. Quantum entanglement confirms that the correlation is instantaneous. The claim is structurally identical at every point. Distance independent, instantaneous connection between separated systems. Prayer says it about consciousness and God. Physics says it about particles and measurement. The vocabulary is different. The mathematics is different. The cultural context is utterly different. But the structure is the same. And the parallel goes deeper. Entanglement has a specific feature that makes it even more structurally similar to prayer than simple non-locality would suggest. Entangled particles are correlated because they share a common origin. They were produced together, interacted together, were part of the same quantum system before being separated. The correlation exists not because of communication between the particles, but because of a shared history, a common source, a single origin from which both emerged. Every prayer tradition makes exactly this claim about the relationship between consciousness and God, that the connection exists not because consciousness sends a signal to God across space, but because consciousness and God share a common origin, because consciousness emerged from God, because the prayer and the divine were one before separation. Because the soul is a piece of the divine that was placed in the body, because Atman is Brahman, because the image of God is in every human being, because the divine spark lives in every consciousness. The connection between the one who prays and the one who hears is not communication across distance. It is correlation from shared origin. It is the entanglement of two systems that were once one and remain connected because they were never truly separated. I am not saying prayer is entanglement. I am saying that the universe contains a confirmed mechanism for distance-independent correlation arising from shared origin. That the universe is not purely local. That non-locality is a feature of physical reality, not a fantasy of religious imagination. That when every prayer tradition on earth claims distance does not matter, They are claiming something that physics has confirmed is possible at the quantum level, not proven at the level of prayer, but confirmed as a feature of the universe in which prayer occurs. The universe is the kind of universe where distance-independent connections exist. This is not proof that prayer works. This is proof that the kind of universe prayer requires actually exists. Now, the neuroscience. What happens in your brain when you pray? Andrew Newberg, a neuroscientist at Thomas Jefferson University, has spent 20 years imaging the brains of people in prayer and meditation. Using SPECT scans that measure blood flow to different brain regions, and more recently fMRI that tracks real-time neural activity, he has mapped the neural signatures of prayer across multiple traditions: Buddhist meditation, Franciscan prayer, Islamic salat, Pentecostal glossolalia, Sikh chanting, Jewish Kabbalistic meditation. What he found is remarkable, not because each tradition produces the same brain state, but because all traditions produce variations on the same two fundamental changes. During intense prayer, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of attention and concentration, shows dramatically increased activity. Blood flow increases by 10 to 15%. The neural firing rate increases. The connectivity between prefrontal regions and deeper brain structures intensifies. The brain region responsible for focused attention lights up like a furnace. The person who is praying is not passive, is not daydreaming, is not drifting into unconsciousness, is not in a reduced state of awareness. The brain of a person in deep prayer shows the neural signature of maximal focused attention, of consciousness directed with extraordinary precision and extraordinary intensity at a single object, more focused than the brain of a chess grandmaster calculating a sequence, more concentrated than the brain of a surgeon performing a delicate operation. The prayer's brain is doing what the brain does when it directs consciousness with everything it has at one thing and one thing only. Simultaneously, the parietal lobe, specifically the posterior superior parietal lobule, the region responsible for spatial orientation and the distinction between self and environment, shows dramatically decreased activity. Blood flow drops. Neural firing decreases. The brain region that tells you where you end and where the world begins goes quiet. The boundary between self and world dissolves, not metaphorically, neurologically. The neural circuitry that maintains the sense of being a separate self, located at a specific point in space, observing an external world from a distance, deactivates. The circuitry that creates the experience of here versus there, of me versus not me, of inside versus outside, all of it dims. And when it dims, the prayer experiences what every mystic in every tradition has described: unity, connectedness, boundarylessness, oneness. The felt sense that the distance between self and God has collapsed to zero, that there is no gap, no separation, no space between the one who prays and the one who hears. Not because the prayer has traveled to God, because the neural machinery that created the experience of distance has been turned off. Think about what this means in quantum terms. The prefrontal cortex in full activation means consciousness is being directed with maximum intensity, maximum focus, maximum precision. This is the neural correlate of the strongest possible observation in quantum mechanical terms. The most intense possible direction of consciousness at a system, and the parietal lobe deactivation means the brain's mechanism for maintaining spatial separation is turned off. The neural circuitry that creates the experience of distance between observer and observed is silenced. The prayer is not experiencing themselves as a distant observer sending a signal across space to a remote God. The prayer is experiencing themselves as unified with the object of prayer. No separation, no distance, no gap. Observer and observed merged, This is exactly the condition that quantum mechanics says is necessary for observation to affect a quantum system. The observer must interact with the system, must be coupled to the system, must not be separated from the system by a barrier that prevents quantum coherence. The brain of a person in deep prayer creates exactly this condition. Maximum observation intensity through prefrontal activation. Minimum observer-observed separation through parietal deactivation. The brain in prayer is optimizing for quantum observation, not deliberately, not because the prayer knows quantum mechanics, because 2,000 years of contemplative practice has discovered through trial and error the neural configuration that maximizes the interaction between consciousness and reality. And there is more. Newberg found that experienced prayers, people who have prayed or meditated for decades, show different neural patterns than beginners. The experienced practitioner achieves deeper prefrontal activation and more complete parietal deactivation. The brain has been trained by years of practice to enter the state more fully, more deeply, more completely. This is neuroplasticity applied to prayer. The brain physically changes in response to repeated prayer. The neural circuitry that supports intense, focused consciousness directed at the transcendent becomes stronger, more efficient, more capable of producing the state. The monk who has meditated for 30 years has a brain that is physically different from the brain of someone who has never meditated. Different cortical thickness in the prefrontal regions, different connectivity between attention networks, different capacity for sustained, focused awareness. This maps onto the contemplative claim about prayer quality with scientific precision. The traditions say experienced prayers are more effective than beginners. The neuroscience confirms that experienced prayers generate different and more intense neural states than beginners. The traditions say prayer is a skill that improves with practice. The neuroscience confirms that the brain regions involved in prayer are strengthened by practice through neuroplasticity. The traditions say the quality of consciousness directed in prayer determines the efficacy of prayer. The neuroscience confirms that the quality of the neural state varies with training and experience. Now, the quantum vacuum. This is where the physics becomes speculative, but also where the deepest and most radical possibility lives. The possibility that connects prayer not to a specific quantum system, but to the foundation of reality itself. The quantum vacuum is not empty. This is one of the most confirmed and least intuitive facts in all of physics. Empty space, the space between atoms, the space between stars, the space inside your body, between the particles that constitute you, is not empty. It is full, seething, roiling with activity, full of quantum fields that fluctuate constantly even at their lowest energy state, full of virtual particles that pop into and out of existence billions of times per second, full of energy that can be calculated, measured, and confirmed. The Casimir effect demonstrates this directly. Two uncharged metal plates placed close together in a vacuum experience a measurable attractive force. Hendrik Casimir predicted this in 1948. The force arises because the vacuum fluctuations between the plates are restricted by the boundary conditions, while the fluctuations outside are not. More vacuum pressure pushes from outside than from inside. The plates are pushed together by nothing, by empty space, by the quantum vacuum that is not empty at all. The Lamb shift confirms this. The energy levels of hydrogen atoms are shifted slightly from what Dirac's equation predicts because the electron interacts with vacuum fluctuations. The shift has been measured to 12 decimal places. 12. The quantum vacuum is real, is physical, is measurable, is the most precisely confirmed feature of reality at the deepest level. And the vacuum responds to observation. This is the key point, the point where the physics of the vacuum connects to the physics of prayer. When you measure a quantum field in the vacuum state, you do not find nothing. You find fluctuations, virtual particles, quantum noise, energy that was always there but that becomes accessible through the act of measurement, and the act of measurement changes the vacuum state. Observation excites the vacuum, can produce real particles from virtual particles, can create something from the observation of apparent nothing. The Unruh effect, predicted by William Unruh in 1976, says that an accelerating observer sees particles where an inertial observer sees vacuum. The very act of observing from a different frame of reference, different perspective, different state of motion, creates particles that were not there for a different observer. The Hawking radiation from black holes is a related phenomenon. The extreme gravitational field at the event horizon rips virtual particles apart, turning them real. The vacuum gives birth to real particles under the right observational conditions. Reality at the deepest level depends on observation. Even the vacuum depends on observation. Even nothing depends on being observed. What if prayer is consciousness interacting with the quantum vacuum, not with individual particles, not with specific quantum systems, with the ground state itself, with the foundation of reality, with the field from which all physical reality emerges? What if the direction of consciousness at the deepest level of reality, the vacuum state, produces perturbations in the vacuum that propagate outward as changes in the probabilities of physical events, not deterministic changes, not miraculous interventions that violate physical law, subtle shifts in probability, slight alterations in the likelihood of one quantum outcome versus another, changes so small that no individual event is noticeably different, but that accumulate over billions of quantum events into macroscopic effects, into the healing that prayer claims, into the answered prayer that the faithful report, into the statistical anomalies that the prayer experiments sometimes detect. But here is the critical question, the question that separates prayer from mere observation, that separates dua from detection, that separates the mother praying for her child from a Geiger counter, clicking at a radioactive atom. A Geiger counter observes. It collapses the wave function. It produces a definite outcome from quantum possibility. But a Geiger counter does not want anything, does not intend anything, does not care which outcome occurs. A Geiger counter has no preference for decay or no decay. The mother praying for her sick child has a preference, has an intention, has a specific desired outcome. She does not merely observe the child's condition, she wills health, desires healing, directs consciousness not just at the system, but toward a specific state of the system. She is not asking what is happening, she is asking for something specific to happen. And this is the difference between observation and prayer. Observation collapses the wave function randomly, prayer attempts to collapse it directionally. Can intention direct quantum outcomes? Can desire shape which possibility becomes actual? The standard quantum formalism says no. The Born rule says the probabilities of outcomes are determined by the wave function alone. No room for intention, no variable for desire, no term in the equation for what you want. But remember Stapp's process 1. The choice of which measurement to perform is not in the equations, is not determined by the Schrödinger equation or the Born rule, is free, and the choice of measurement determines which outcomes are possible. Different measurements yield different outcome sets. If consciousness through process, one can choose which quantum question to ask of reality, and if that choice can be directed by intention, by desire, by the specific content of prayer, then intention enters quantum mechanics, not by overriding the probabilities, but by selecting which probability distribution applies. You cannot load the dice, but you can choose which dice to roll. And choosing which dice to roll is choosing which outcomes are possible. And choosing which outcomes are possible is a form of power over reality that violates no equation and requires no miracle. Apply this to the mother praying for her child. The child's body is a quantum system. Trillions of quantum events per second in every cell. Ion channels opening and closing through quantum tunneling. Enzyme reactions proceeding through quantum mechanical transition states. DNA repair mechanisms operating through quantum error correction, protein folding guided by quantum mechanical energy landscapes. Each event has a probability distribution. Each event collapses into one outcome. The mother's prayer, her directed intention, her focused consciousness, holding the template of health is process 1, applied at a distance. Choosing which quantum question to ask of the child's biology. Selecting the measurement basis. Not demanding a specific outcome, shaping the space of possible outcomes. Tilting the probability landscape so that the set of available outcomes clusters more around health and less around disease. Not by changing the probabilities within any single measurement. By choosing which measurements occur. By directing attention at the aspect of reality where healing lives. And the vacuum is the medium through which this direction propagates, because the vacuum connects everything. Every point in space is connected to every other point through the quantum fields that constitute the vacuum. The vacuum is non-local. The vacuum is everywhere simultaneously. When consciousness interacts with the vacuum at one location, the perturbation propagates instantaneously through the field, not as a signal that travels, as a correlation that exists. The way entangled particles are correlated not through communication but through shared field structure. The mother's intention enters the vacuum here, and the child's quantum biology responds there. Not because a signal traveled between them, because they share the same vacuum, the same field, the same ground of reality, and a perturbation in that shared ground affects both simultaneously. Non-locally, the way a vibration in a spider's web affects every point on the web simultaneously, because the web is one connected structure. This is the stochastic resonance model of prayer. In physics, stochastic resonance is the phenomenon where a weak signal becomes detectable when combined with noise. The noise amplifies the signal. Your neurons use this. Weak sensory signals below firing threshold become detectable because neural noise provides extra energy. Evolution built stochastic resonance into your nervous system because it works. Apply this to prayer. The vacuum fluctuations are the noise. Consciousness directed with intention is the weak signal. Combined with quantum noise, the signal might be amplified, might push quantum events over thresholds, might alter probabilities that accumulate over billions of quantum events per microsecond into macroscopic effects. This explains the prayer experiments. The TARG study found effects with experienced healers. The Stapp trial found no effects with ordinary congregants. If prayer requires stochastic resonance, then signal strength matters enormously. The monk and the congregant are not doing the same thing any more than a laser and a flashlight are doing the same thing. Both produce light. One cuts through steel, the other barely illuminates a room. Prayer from trained consciousness is laser. Prayer from untrained consciousness is flashlight. This is speculation. Must be stated clearly as speculation. There is no confirmed experimental evidence for this specific mechanism. No equation that describes consciousness interacting with the quantum vacuum through stochastic resonance. No theory that makes quantitative predictions. It is a hypothesis, a framework, a possibility, not a conclusion. And it might be wrong, might be completely wrong, might be the kind of attractive speculation that falls apart under experimental scrutiny. The honest position requires stating this clearly. But the hypothesis is consistent with everything we know about quantum mechanics, consistent with the vacuum not being empty, consistent with observation affecting quantum fields, consistent with stochastic resonance being a real physical phenomenon used by biological systems, consistent with non-local correlations existing between quantum systems, consistent with the quality of observation determining the degree of effect, consistent with every feature of quantum mechanics that makes the prayer physics connection possible. Not proven, but consistent. And in science, consistency with known physics is the first requirement for any hypothesis to be taken seriously. And the hypothesis is consistent with something else. something that every mystical tradition teaches about the nature of prayer. That prayer is not about changing God's mind, not about persuading an external deity to intervene in the physical world against the laws he created, not about sending a request to a distant receiver and hoping for a response like a cosmic customer service call. Prayer is about something far more fundamental. Prayer is about aligning consciousness with the ground of being, with the deepest level of reality, with the source from which all phenomena emerge and to which all phenomena return. The Sufi says prayer is not you speaking to God, prayer is God speaking through you. The prayer is not the source of the prayer. The prayer is the channel through which prayer flows. The consciousness that prays is not separate from the divine consciousness that receives the prayer. They are one consciousness, one awareness, one field of being temporarily experiencing itself as two. And prayer is the act of remembering the oneness. Dhikr in Arabic, remembrance. The most common form of Sufi prayer is literally called remembrance, not petitioning God, remembering God. Remembering that you and God are not two, were never two, that the separation is appearance, not reality, that the distance prayer claims to cross does not exist. The Buddhist says meditation is not directed at an external object. Meditation is consciousness recognizing its own nature. The ground of being that the Buddhist directs awareness toward is not a God out there. It is sunyata, emptiness, the void from which all form arises, the quantum vacuum of Buddhist metaphysics. And the meditator does not send a signal to the void. The meditator recognizes that they are the void. That consciousness and emptiness are not two things, that the observer and the observed in Buddhist terminology, the knower and the known, are aspects of a single process, not two things connected across distance, one thing appearing as two. The Hindu says prayer is not the ego petitioning Brahman from outside. Prayer is Brahman becoming aware of itself through the prayer. The Mandukya Upanishad says, I am Atma Brahma. This self is Brahman. Not this self is connected to Brahman. This self is Brahman. The prayer does not reach toward the divine. The prayer is the divine reaching toward itself. The prayer is not communication between two entities. The prayer is one entity recognizing itself in what it previously mistook for another. The Christian mystic Meister Eckhart said, the eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. One eye, one seeing, one act of awareness. Not two acts connected by prayer. One act in which the prayer and the divine are not two things connected across distance, but one thing recognizing itself. And for this statement, for this insight, for this experience of unity, Eckhart was condemned as a heretic by the Church. Because the institutional structure of religion requires a gap between prayer and God, requires distance, requires the signal, requires the petition and the response, requires the customer service model of prayer. The mystic's experience of unity threatens the institution, but the mystic's experience is exactly what quantum mechanics describes. Observer and observed, entangled, inseparable, mutually defining. One system, not two. If the quantum vacuum is the ground of physical reality, the foundation, the source, the field from which everything emerges, and if consciousness interacting with the vacuum is what observation is at the deepest level, then prayer as consciousness directed at the ground of being is consciousness interacting with the quantum vacuum, is observation directed at the foundation of reality, is the most fundamental act of quantum measurement possible. Not measurement of a specific particle in a specific experiment, in a specific laboratory. Observation of reality itself, at its most fundamental level, where everything is connected because everything emerges from the same field, where distance does not apply because the field is everywhere, simultaneously, where separation is appearance because the vacuum that underlies your body and the vacuum that underlies the person you pray for and the vacuum that underlies the most distant galaxy are the same vacuum. one field, one ground, one reality appearing as many. And prayer is consciousness, recognizing this, directing attention at the unity beneath the apparent separation, observing the one where the eyes see many, remembering what the brain's parietal lobe makes you forget, that you are not separate, were never separate, that the distance prayer seems to cross was never real. In part 3, we go deeper still, into the specific prayer practices of different traditions and how each maps onto a specific quantum mechanical phenomenon with startling precision. Islamic Dhikr and the quantum Zeno effect, repetitive invocation as continuous observation that stabilizes quantum states. Buddhist metta, meditation, and quantum entanglement. Loving kindness directed at all beings as the experiential recognition of non-local connection, Christian contemplative prayer, and wave function collapse. The dark night of the soul as decoherence, and the moment of grace as measurement, Hindu mantra and quantum field resonance, sacred sound as frequency that couples to the vibrational modes of quantum fields. Each tradition discovered through centuries of contemplative experiment a specific technique for directing consciousness at reality. And each technique corresponds with remarkable precision to a specific feature of quantum mechanics, as if the mystics were doing physics without equations, as if prayer was experimentation without instruments, as if the laboratory of the soul and the laboratory of the physicist were studying the same phenomenon from opposite ends and arriving at the same results through utterly different methods. The mystics did not have particle accelerators, did not have interferometers or photon detectors or superconducting quantum circuits, did not have calculus or linear algebra or differential equations, did not have the conceptual framework of quantum field theory or the Schrödinger equation or Hilbert space or any of the mathematical machinery that modern physics considers essential for understanding the quantum world. Rumi did not know about wave functions. Eckhart did not know about superposition. Nagarjuna did not know about the uncertainty principle. Shankara did not know about quantum field theory. Teresa of Avila did not know about decoherence. The Buddha did not know about entanglement. They had nothing that modern physics considers necessary for understanding quantum reality. And yet they described it, with remarkable accuracy, with specific structural precision, with details that match the details of quantum mechanical phenomena in ways that should not be possible if their practices were mere self-delusion and their experiences mere hallucination. Not the formalism, not the equations, not the mathematical structure that allows physicists to make predictions to 12 decimal places, but the phenomenology, the experiential content, the felt quality of encountering quantum reality from the inside rather than the outside, through decades of disciplined introspection, through the most rigorous experimentation available to human beings before the invention of the laboratory, the experiment of turning consciousness on itself, of observing the observer, of measuring the measurer, of directing the only instrument that has direct unmediated access to the boundary between consciousness and physical reality at that boundary, and reporting what it finds. The mind observing its own interaction with the ground of being. And what they discovered maps onto quantum mechanics with a precision that should not be possible if prayer is mere superstition, should not exist if contemplative practice is mere self-delusion, should not be there if the mystics were simply fooling themselves with hyperactive agent detection and pattern recognition gone wrong. 4 traditions, 4 prayer practices, 4 quantum phenomena. The correspondence is specific enough to be either extraordinary coincidence or evidence of something real. Dhikr and the quantum Zeno effect. Dhikr is the central practice of Sufi Islam. The word means remembrance. The practice is repetition, the repetition of divine names. La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. Repeated. Hundreds of times, thousands of times, in some orders tens of thousands of times per day, not as mindless recitation, as concentrated, focused, intensely present repetition. Each iteration, a complete act of consciousness directed at the divine. Each repetition, a renewal of awareness, each utterance, a fresh observation. The Dhikr practitioner does not say the words once and move on. The practitioner says the words again and again and again, maintaining continuous conscious attention on the divine name. The Naqshbandi order practices silent dhikr, the name repeated internally without sound. Pure consciousness directed at the divine without even the mediation of voice. Continuous, unbroken, sustained observation of the divine. Hour after hour, day after day, year after year, decade after decade. Now, the quantum Zeno effect, discovered theoretically by Baidyanath Misra and George Sudarshan in 1977, confirmed experimentally by Wayne Itano and colleagues at the National Institute of Standards and Technology in 1990. The effect is simple to state and profound in implication. If you observe a quantum system continuously, the system cannot change state. A radioactive atom watched without interruption will never decay. An unstable quantum state measured repeatedly will never transition. Continuous observation freezes the quantum system, locks it in its current state, prevents the natural evolution that would otherwise occur. The watched pot never boils, not as proverb, as physics, as experimentally confirmed quantum mechanical fact. The parallel is precise, more precise than any vague analogy has a right to be. Dhikr is continuous observation of the divine. The quantum Zeno effect is continuous observation of a quantum system. Dhikr claims that continuous remembrance of God stabilizes the soul, prevents spiritual decay, prevents the deterioration of consciousness that occurs when attention wanders from the divine, prevents the corruption of the heart that happens when the world's noise overwhelms the divine signal. The quantum Zeno effect confirms that continuous observation stabilizes a quantum system, prevents quantum decay, prevents the transition from one quantum state to another that occurs when observation ceases, prevents the natural evolution that would otherwise change the system's state. The Sufi masters say that when dhikr stops, the heart begins to rust. That the moment you stop remembering God, the world begins to corrode your spiritual state. That forgetfulness, ghafla, is the fundamental spiritual disease. That the cure is remembrance, continuous remembrance, unbroken remembrance. The remembrance that becomes so constant that it no longer requires effort. That becomes the default state of consciousness rather than the exceptional state. Abu Bakr al-Shibli, the 10th century Sufi, said, "I have not made dhikr of God for a single moment." He meant that dhikr had become so continuous that there was no discrete moment of remembrance, just an unbroken flow of awareness, no gaps, no interruptions, no moments where the divine name was absent from consciousness. This is the Zeno limit, the limit where observation becomes truly continuous, where the frequency of measurement approaches infinity, where the quantum system is frozen absolutely because there is no interval between measurements during which evolution could occur. Quantum mechanics says that when observation stops, the quantum system begins to evolve, that the moment you stop measuring, the state begins to change, that the probability of transition increases with the time between measurements. Measure frequently and the system stays frozen. Measure infrequently and the system evolves. Stop measuring entirely and the system changes freely. The Zeno effect is not all or nothing. It is frequency dependent. More frequent observation produces more stabilization. Less frequent observation produces less. And zero observation produces zero stabilization. The system evolves freely without observation, decays freely without measurement, changes freely without consciousness directed at it. This maps onto the Sufi hierarchy of dhikr practitioners with extraordinary precision. The beginner who remembers God once a day experiences minimal stabilization. The intermediate practitioner who engages in regular daily sessions of dhikr experiences moderate stabilization. The advanced practitioner whose dhikr is nearly continuous experiences profound stabilization. And the master whose dhikr has become the heartbeat itself, automatic, continuous, unbroken experiences, what the Sufis call fana, annihilation in the divine, the complete stabilization of consciousness in the divine state, the quantum Zeno limit reached through contemplative practice, the heart frozen in remembrance the way the atom is frozen in its state by continuous observation. Metta and quantum entanglement. Metta is the Buddhist practice of loving-kindness meditation. The practice begins with directing love and compassion toward yourself. May I be happy. May I be free from suffering. May I be at peace. Then the circle expands. May my loved ones be happy. May my neighbors be happy. May my community be happy. May my country be happy. May all beings everywhere be happy. The circle of compassion expands from self to loved ones, to strangers, to enemies, to all sentient beings in all realms of existence. The practice is not wishful thinking, not idle hoping. The practice is the systematic extension of conscious, compassionate awareness to encompass all beings, the deliberate expansion of the boundary of the self to include everything, the dissolution of the distinction between self and other through the force of directed compassion. Advanced metta practitioners report a specific experience that neuroscience has confirmed with brain imaging: the experience of boundarylessness, of the self expanding to include others, of the distinction between I and you dissolving not through intellectual understanding but through direct experience. Matthieu Ricard, the Buddhist monk, whose brain has been studied extensively by Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin, shows extraordinary neural activity during metta practice. His gamma wave activity, the neural signature of heightened awareness and cognitive integration, is the highest ever recorded in any human being. His brain during metta meditation is not in a reduced state. It is in a maximally connected state, every region communicating with every other region, the neural correlate of a consciousness that has expanded to include everything. Now, quantum entanglement, the phenomenon where two particles that have interacted become permanently correlated. Measuring one instantly determines the state of the other, regardless of distance. The key feature of entanglement for our purposes is not the correlation itself, but what the correlation implies about the nature of the systems involved. Entangled particles are no longer independent systems. They are one system, one quantum state described by one wave function that cannot be factored into independent parts. The mathematical structure is clear. The wave function of an entangled pair cannot be written as the product of two individual wave functions. The system is irreducibly unified. The separation between the particles is spatial, physical, geometric, but the system is unitary. They are two things that are actually one thing, two particles that are actually one state, two locations, housing one reality. The boundary between them is apparent, not fundamental. Metta meditation is the experiential practice of entanglement, the systematic dissolution of the boundary between self and other through directed compassion, the expansion of awareness to include other beings not as objects observed from outside, but as aspects of one's own consciousness. The meditator does not simply wish well for others from a distance. The meditator extends the boundary of the self outward, includes others within the field of self-awareness, experiences others' suffering as one's own suffering, experiences others' joy as one's own joy. The separation between self and other dissolves, not intellectually but experientially. The meditator discovers through direct practice that the boundary between I and you is not fundamental, is not given, is a construction of the brain's parietal lobe, as Newberg's imaging shows. And this construction can be deconstructed through practice. The self can expand, the boundary can dissolve, the one can include the many. The neuroscience supports this powerfully. Davidson's studies of Ricard and other experienced metta practitioners show that during practice the brain enters a state of extraordinary global coherence. the neural correlate of a system that has become more unified, more integrated, more like one system and less like many subsystems, operating independently. The gamma wave synchronization across distant brain regions creates a neural state that is the biological analog of quantum entanglement. Parts of the brain that normally operate independently become correlated, fire together, synchronize, act as one system, and the practitioner experiences this neural entanglement as the dissolution of the boundary between self and world, as compassion extending to all beings, as the direct experiential recognition that separation is appearance, not reality, exactly what entanglement says about particles, applied to consciousness, experienced directly, without equations, without instruments, through the systematic practice of extending awareness until the boundary between observer and observed disappears, and what remains is one undivided field of compassionate awareness. Contemplative prayer and wave function collapse. The Christian contemplative tradition describes a specific pattern in the spiritual journey that maps onto wave function collapse with remarkable precision. The pattern has 3 stages described by virtually every major Christian mystic, from the Desert Fathers to Teresa of Avila to John of the Cross to Thomas Merton. The first stage is purgation, the stripping away of attachments, distractions, and false identities, the dissolution of everything you thought you were, everything you clung to, every certainty, every comfort, every familiar structure of self and world. The Desert Fathers called it apatheia, not apathy in the modern sense. Freedom from the passions that distort consciousness. Freedom from the attachments that prevent clear seeing. The systematic removal of everything that is not God, so that God can be seen directly. Teresa of Avila described the first mansions of the interior castle as the place where the soul begins to shed its worldly encumbrances, where the noise of the world is gradually silenced, where the competing voices of desire and fear and habit and convention are one by one identified and released. This stage can take years, decades, a lifetime. The stripping is gradual and painful because what is being stripped feels like you. The false self does not announce itself as false. It feels real, feels like the only self you have. Losing it feels like dying, because it is dying. The death of the false self, the death of the ego, the death of everything that is not God. The second stage is the dark night of the soul. Named by John of the Cross in the 16th century, but described by contemplatives for over a millennium before him. The Desert Mother Syncletica said, "In the beginning there are a great many battles and a good deal of suffering, but afterward there is indescribable joy. It is like building a fire. At first those who wish to light a fire are choked with smoke and cry, and then they obtain what they sought. The dark night is the smoke, the period between the death of the false self and the birth of the true self, the period of absolute unknowing, of formlessness, of being suspended between what you were and what you will become, with no ground beneath you and no light above you, and no guarantee that anything will emerge from the darkness. Only uncertainty, only the absence of everything familiar, only faith that the darkness is not destruction but gestation, not ending but becoming, not death but the space between death and resurrection. The third stage is illumination, the sudden emergence of a new way of being, a new consciousness, a new relationship with God that is direct, unmediated, and utterly different from anything that preceded it. The mystics describe it as rebirth, as being made new, as seeing with new eyes, as awakening from a dream you did not know you were in. Teresa of Avila called it spiritual marriage, the union of the soul with God so complete that the soul cannot distinguish itself from God. Merton described it as the discovery that you are already that which you seek, that you are always that which you seek, that the seeking itself was the last barrier to finding. The illumination is not the acquisition of something new, it is the recognition of something that was always there. hidden by the noise of superposition, obscured by the many competing states, invisible until the many were stripped away and the one emerged. The direct experience of God that transforms everything, not by changing reality, but by changing the consciousness that perceives reality. By collapsing the superposition of the soul into a single definite state of union with the divine. Now wave function collapse. Before measurement, the quantum system exists in superposition. Multiple possibilities coexisting simultaneously. Multiple states. No definite reality. No single outcome. Just the probability cloud of all possible outcomes overlapping and interfering. This is the pre-prayer state. The state of the soul before contemplation begins. Full of attachments. Full of false identities. Full of competing possibilities. Full of noise. Purgation is decoherence. The systematic elimination of quantum interference. The stripping away of the coherence between competing states. The dissolution of the superposition through interaction with the environment. The false self is the superposition. The many competing identities and attachments and distractions that maintain the soul in a state of quantum indefiniteness. Purgation strips them away. Decoherence destroys the interference. The system moves from superposition toward definiteness. The dark night is the moment between decoherence and collapse, the moment when the interference has been eliminated but no definite outcome has yet emerged. The system is decohered but not collapsed. The branches have been separated but no branch has been selected. It is the moment of maximum uncertainty, maximum formlessness, maximum darkness. The quantum system is no longer in superposition but is not yet in a definite state. It is between. In the gap. In the darkness that exists after the many possibilities have been stripped away and before the one actuality has emerged. Illumination is collapse, the emergence of the definite state, the one actuality selected from the decohered possibilities, the new consciousness born from the darkness. The direct experience of God that is no longer mediated by the false self, no longer obscured by competing identities, no longer confused by the noise of superposition. Pure, definite, clear. The wave function has collapsed, the soul has been made new, one state, one reality, one direct, unmediated experience of the divine. The contemplative tradition discovered wave function collapse through prayer, through decades of interior experiment, through the systematic observation of what happens when consciousness is directed at the divine, with total commitment over years and decades. The stages are the same. The process is the same. The movement from superposition through decoherence, through the dark night of indefiniteness, to the collapse into definite illuminated consciousness, is the same, whether described in the language of quantum mechanics or the language of Christian mysticism. Same process, same stages, same structure, different vocabularies, mantra and quantum field resonance. The Hindu tradition of mantra is perhaps the most explicitly physical of all prayer practices. Mantra is sound, vibration, frequency. The tradition claims that specific sounds, specific frequencies, specific patterns of vibration resonate with the fundamental structure of reality, that when you chant Om, you are not merely producing a sound, you are producing the frequency of the universe itself, the vibration that underlies all creation, the primordial sound from which all other sounds, all other forms, all other phenomena emerge. The Mandukya Upanishad says Om is everything. This syllable is the past, the present, and the future. Everything that exists is Om, and everything that transcends past, present, and future is also Om. Om is the ground of being expressed as vibration, as frequency, as the wave structure of reality itself. Now, quantum field theory. The most fundamental description of physical reality that physics has produced. Every particle in the universe is an excitation of a quantum field. An electron is not a tiny ball of matter. An electron is a vibration in the electron field, a specific pattern of oscillation, a wave. A photon is not a bullet of light. A photon is a vibration in the electromagnetic field. A quark is a vibration in the quark field. A Higgs boson is a vibration in the Higgs field. Matter is not stuff. Matter is vibration. Particles are not things. Particles are patterns of vibration in underlying fields that fill all of space. The universe at its most fundamental level is not made of objects. It is made of vibrations, of frequencies, of oscillations in quantum fields. When you excite the electromagnetic field at the right frequency, you produce a photon. When you excite the electron field at the right energy, you produce an electron. When you excite the Higgs field at sufficient energy, you produce a Higgs boson. The universe is a symphony of vibrations in quantum fields. Every particle is a note. Every force is a harmony. Every interaction is a resonance between vibrations, and the symphony plays continuously. In every point of space, at every moment of time, the fields vibrate. The universe sings. Mantra claims to participate in this singing, to tap the fundamental fields through sound, through vibration, through frequency, through the deliberate production of vibrations in human consciousness that resonate with the vibrations that constitute reality. The claim is that specific mantras, specific patterns of vibration, are not arbitrary cultural conventions but correspond to real features of the vibrational structure of reality. That Om is not just a syllable. Om is a frequency that resonates with something fundamental about the structure of the universe, that the sound carries information about the ground state of reality. That chanting is not merely cultural practice but physical coupling between the vibrations of consciousness and the vibrations of the fields from which everything emerges. Is this literally true? Probably not in the crude sense that the acoustic frequency of a chanted Om directly excites quantum fields. The acoustic frequencies of human speech are separated from quantum field frequencies by many orders of magnitude. The literal interpretation fails, but the structural interpretation is remarkable. The Hindu sages intuited 25 centuries before quantum field theory that reality is vibration, that the fundamental nature of existence is oscillation in underlying fields, that matter is not primary, vibration is primary, that the universe is not made of stuff but of patterns, of waves, of frequencies. And they developed a practice mantra chanting that treats consciousness as a vibration that can resonate with the fundamental vibrations of reality. That treats prayer as the tuning of the human instrument to the frequency of the cosmos. That treats the prayer not as a supplicant petitioning an external God, but as a vibrating system coupling to the vibrations that constitute the divine. This is not metaphor for the Hindu tradition. This is physics expressed in experiential terms. The Nada Brahma tradition says the universe is sound, not produces sound, is sound, Brahman is vibration. Reality is oscillation. Everything that exists is a pattern of vibration in the divine field. And mantra is the practice of producing vibrations in human consciousness that couple to the divine vibrations that constitute reality. Quantum field theory says the universe is vibration, not produces vibration, is vibration. Every particle is an oscillation in a quantum field. Every force is a coupling between vibrations. Everything that exists is a pattern of excitation in underlying fields. The structure is identical to Nada Brahma, different mathematical formalism, same physical insight. Reality is vibration, 4 traditions, 4 practices, 4 quantum phenomena. Dhikr maps onto the Zeno effect, metta maps onto entanglement, contemplative prayer maps onto wave function collapse, mantra maps onto quantum field resonance. Each tradition discovered through centuries of contemplative experiment a specific feature of quantum reality, not the mathematics, not the formalism, not the prediction to 12 decimal places, the experiential content, the phenomenology, what it is like from the inside when consciousness interacts with the deepest levels of physical reality. And these are not vague parallels, not the kind of loose analogy that you can make between any two complex systems if you squint hard enough. These are specific structural correspondences. Dhikr involves repetition. The Zeno effect involves repeated measurement. Dhikr's effectiveness depends on frequency. The Zeno effect's strength depends on measurement frequency. Dhikr stabilizes through continuous observation. The Zeno effect stabilizes through continuous observation. Metta involves dissolving boundaries between self and other. Entanglement involves unified states that cannot be factored into independent parts. Contemplative prayer involves 3 stages of dissolution, darkness, and emergence. Wave function collapse involves superposition, decoherence, and the emergence of definite states. Mantra involves vibration, frequency, and resonance. Quantum field theory describes reality as vibration, frequency, and resonance. The specificity of the parallels is what makes them significant. The details match, not just the broad strokes. The probability that this is coincidence decreases with each correspondence. One parallel might be coincidence, a lucky match between a complex practice and a complex theory. 2 parallels might be pattern recognition, the human brain's tendency to see connections that are not there. 3 strains credulity, 3 specific structural correspondences from 3 independent traditions, all mapping onto 3 distinct, well-confirmed features of quantum mechanics, starts to look less like coincidence and more like evidence. 4 correspondences from 4 independent traditions developed on 4 different continents across 25 centuries of human contemplative experience, all mapping onto 4 distinct, well-confirmed features of quantum mechanics with the specific details matching is either the most extraordinary coincidence in intellectual history or evidence that contemplative practice and quantum physics are accessing the same reality from different ends. The mystics are doing physics, not with equations, with consciousness, not in laboratories, in temples and caves and monastery cells and forest clearings, and the dark rooms where the faithful kneel, and the mountain peaks where the saints sit in silence. They are experimenting, systematically, rigorously, with the most sophisticated instrument available, the human mind directed at its own foundation, and their results match the results of physics, not perfectly, not with 12 decimal places, but structurally, specifically, in the details, in ways that pure coincidence cannot easily explain. And here is the deepest implication. If the mystics are accessing the same reality as the physicists through a different method, then the method matters. Then consciousness directed at reality is not superstition but methodology, not delusion but instrument, not error but experiment. And prayer is not the behavioral fossil of evolutionary paranoia. Prayer is the oldest experimental method, the original scientific instrument, the first technology for investigating the boundary between consciousness and reality, older than the telescope, older than the microscope, older than the particle accelerator, older than mathematics itself. The original experiment, consciousness directed at reality, observation of the deepest structure, measurement of the ground of being. Done not with instruments built from metal and glass, but with the instrument that built the instruments. The mind, the awareness, the consciousness that is simultaneously the experimenter and the experiment, the observer and the observed, the one who prays and the one who is reached by prayer. In part 4, we bring everything together. The physics, the neuroscience, the experiments, the traditions, the correspondences, and we ask the final question. Not does prayer work in the simple sense of does asking God for things produce results, but what is prayer at the deepest level? What is the act that 2 billion people perform every day? What are they doing when they close their eyes and direct consciousness at the invisible and expect the visible to change? Are they deluding themselves with cognitive bias inherited from savannah ancestors who saw lions in every shadow? Or are they performing the most fundamental act of quantum mechanics, the act of observation, the act of measurement, the act of consciousness meeting reality at its deepest level and participating in the making of reality itself? And if prayer is observation, and observation is what makes the quantum world definite, then prayer is not superstition. Prayer is not delusion. Prayer is not the echo of evolutionary paranoia. Prayer is participation in the creation of reality, in the making of the actual from the possible, in the transformation of quantum superposition into definite experience. 2 billion people closing their eyes today and participating in the creation of reality, not because God is listening from outside, because consciousness is woven into reality from inside, and prayer is what consciousness does when it remembers this. Not metaphorically, actually close them. For 5 seconds. Close your eyes and notice what happens. Notice the shift in consciousness. Notice how the visual world disappears and something else emerges. The inner world, the world of awareness without object, the world of consciousness directed at itself. The world that exists when the external stimuli stop and what remains is pure attention, pure presence, pure awareness, aware of being aware. You just did something extraordinary, something so ordinary that you do not recognize it as extraordinary. You withdrew consciousness from the external world and directed it inward. You shifted the vector of awareness from outward to inward, from the seen to the unseen, from the material to the immaterial, from the measured to the unmeasurable. You perform the most basic act of prayer, not prayer to a specific God, not prayer with specific words or specific intentions or specific theological commitments, not the prayer of any religion or the prayer of no religion. The foundational act that underlies all prayer in all traditions everywhere on earth, across all of human history. The withdrawal of attention from the visible and the direction of attention toward the invisible. The closing of the outer eye and the opening of the inner eye. The shift from observing the world to observing the observer. The shift from consciousness directed at objects to consciousness directed at consciousness itself. Every prayer in every tradition begins here. The Muslim faces Mecca and closes his eyes. The Christian bows her head and closes her eyes. The Buddhist sits on the cushion and closes his eyes. The Hindu stands before the murti and closes her eyes. The shaman enters the trance by closing the eyes. The mystic enters contemplation by closing the eyes. The gesture is universal because the act is universal. The withdrawal of outward attention. The redirection of consciousness inward. The fundamental shift from observer of the world to observer of the observer. Every prayer begins with this shift, without exception. Across every tradition, the closing of the eyes is the opening of prayer, has been, always, everywhere. And in those 5 seconds with your eyes closed, the quantum state of your brain changed. The neural firing patterns shifted. The prefrontal cortex activated differently. The default mode network, the brain's autopilot, began to engage. The parietal lobe's spatial processing altered. The boundary between self and world softened. Not dramatically, not in 5 seconds, but the direction of change began. The vector of consciousness shifted from outward to inward, from the world to the self, from the observed to the observer. This is what 2 billion people did today. Closed their eyes, shifted the vector, directed consciousness away from the material and towards something else, something inner, something invisible, something that the instruments of physics cannot detect, but that the instrument of consciousness can access directly. They withdrew from the observed and attended to the observer, and in doing so they performed an act that quantum mechanics says is the most fundamental act in physics. They observed. They directed consciousness at reality. And if the measurement problem is real, and observation does something that the Schrödinger equation does not describe, then 2 billion people today did something that physics cannot explain, but that physics says matters. Something that changes quantum states, something that collapses wave functions, something that participates in the creation of definite reality from quantum possibility. John Archibald Wheeler understood this. Wheeler, the last surviving collaborator of both Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein. Wheeler, who named the black hole. Wheeler, who contributed more concepts to modern physics than almost any physicist of the 20th century. Wheeler, who in his later years became increasingly convinced that the universe is not a machine watched by observers, but a participatory process in which observers are essential participants. Wheeler drew a diagram, the most important diagram in the philosophy of physics, a large capital U. At the base of the U, the Big Bang, the origin of the universe, 13.8 billion years ago. The universe begins. Along one side of the U, the universe evolves, stars form, galaxies coalesce, planets emerge, chemistry becomes biology, biology becomes consciousness, consciousness becomes observation. At the top of the U, an eye, the eye of the observer, looking back down at the base, looking back at the Big Bang. And in Wheeler's diagram, the eye at the top, the observer, the consciousness, does not merely witness the universe that produced it. The eye participates in making the universe definite. The observation from the top of the U reaches back to the base and makes the beginning real, makes the quantum events of the early universe definite, makes the history that produced the observer actual rather than merely possible. This is the participatory universe, Wheeler's deepest insight, the insight that occupied the last decades of his life, and that he considered more important than black holes, more important than nuclear physics, more important than anything else he had contributed to science. The universe does not exist independently of observation. The universe requires observers to become definite, to become actual, to become real, rather than merely possible. Without observers, the universe remains in superposition, in quantum possibility, in the indeterminate state of all possible histories simultaneously. A ghost universe, a shadow universe, a universe of maybes that never become is. The observer makes the history definite, makes the universe real, makes the actual emerge from the possible, not in the present moment only, retroactively. Reaching back through 13.8 billion years of cosmic evolution, the observation from the top of the U reaches back to the base and makes the quantum events of the early universe definite, makes the fluctuations in the primordial plasma that seeded galaxies actual rather than merely probable, makes the nuclear reactions in the first stars definite rather than superposed, makes the chemistry that produced life on Earth real rather than possible. The entire history of the universe made definite by the observation of the beings that the history produced. This is not mysticism smuggled into physics. This is Wheeler, one of the most rigorous physicists of the 20th century. The man who worked with Bohr on complementarity. The man who worked with Einstein on unified field theory. The man who supervised the doctoral dissertations of Richard Feynman and Hugh Everett, a physicist's physicist. And he concluded that the universe is participatory, that observers are not accidents of evolution watching a pre-existing show, that observers are essential participants in the making of the show, that without them there is no show, just quantum superposition, just possibility, just the unobserved wave function, evolving forever, without ever becoming anything definite. Wheeler said it in 3 words: it from bit, reality from information, the physical from the observed, the actual from the measured, the it of matter and energy and space-time from the bit of observation and measurement and information. The universe is not made of stuff. The universe is made of observations, of measurements, of conscious acts that transform the possible into the actual. The bit produces the it. The observation produces the reality. The measurement produces the matter. And consciousness is the source of measurement, the origin of observation, the ground of the bit from which the it emerges. If Wheeler is right, then prayer is not what we thought it was. Not what the skeptics think it is. Not what many religious people think it is. Prayer is not a human being sending a message to a distant God and hoping for a reply. Not a signal transmitted from earth to heaven through some spiritual ether. Not communication across a gap between two separate entities, the small one asking and the large one deciding whether to grant the request. Prayer is not petition from creature to creator. Prayer is participation. In the creation of reality itself, in the making of the actual from the possible, in the transformation of quantum superposition into definite experience, in the fundamental process by which the universe becomes real. When you close your eyes and direct consciousness at reality, you are doing what Wheeler's diagram shows. You are the I at the top of the U. You are the observer whose observation makes the universe definite. You are the consciousness whose attention transforms possibility into actuality. You are the measurement that the quantum world requires to become the classical world, not metaphorically, not as a nice way of thinking about prayer that makes it feel more scientific. Physically, in the same sense that every quantum measurement transforms possibility into actuality, in the same sense that every observation collapses the wave function, or selects a branch, or decoheres the alternatives, or however you interpret what measurement does. In the same sense that every act of consciousness directed at a quantum system changes what the system does. You are doing physics, the oldest physics, the physics that human beings have been doing since before they had a name for it, since before they had language, since before they had anything except consciousness and the compulsion to direct it at something beyond the material. Prayer is observation at the most fundamental level, not observation of a specific particle in a specific apparatus in a specific laboratory. Observation of reality itself, directed at the ground of being, directed at the source from which all phenomena emerge, directed at the quantum vacuum that is not empty but full of all possibilities, directed at the field from which every particle in the universe is an excitation. And if observation at the quantum level changes what is observed, and this is confirmed, physics, beyond any doubt, then observation directed at the foundation of reality changes the foundation, not through magic, not through violation of physical law, not through some supernatural channel that bypasses the equations, through the same mechanism that makes every quantum measurement produce a definite result, through observation, through the participatory act that Wheeler identified as the fundamental process of reality, consciousness meeting possibility, possibility becoming actuality, the observer and the observed co-creating the real from the possible. This is what happens in every laboratory on Earth when a physicist makes a measurement. And this is what happens in every mosque and temple and church and cave and bedroom on Earth when a human being closes their eyes and prays. And this is what the mystics have been saying, in every tradition, for millennia. Not that God is a being out there who receives prayers like a cosmic customer service representative. Not that the universe is a vending machine where you insert the right prayer and the right result comes out. But that consciousness and reality are not separate, that the observer and the observed are entangled. That prayer is not communication across a gap, but recognition that there is no gap. That the act of directing consciousness at the divine is the act of participating in the creation of reality, because the divine is the ground of reality, and consciousness directed at the ground is observation, directed at the source of everything. Rumi said, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop." This is not poetry. This is not metaphor designed to make the listener feel cosmically significant. This is the participatory universe expressed in 13th century Sufi vocabulary. You are not a small consciousness observing a large universe from outside, like a child pressing its face to a window. You are the universe's consciousness observing itself from inside. Your observation is the universe's observation. Your prayer is the universe's self-awareness directed at its own ground. Your consciousness directed at the foundation of being is the foundation of being, becoming conscious of itself through the instrument it created for exactly this purpose, through you, through the nervous system that evolution built over 4 billion years, through the brain that quantum mechanics operates in, through the awareness that the universe produced at the top of Wheeler's U to look back at the bottom and make it all real. The Quran says we are closer to him than his jugular vein. Quran 50-16, and says wherever you turn there is the face of God. Quran 2-115. These are not statements about a God who is very close. These are statements about a God who is identical with the reality you inhabit. Not God is everywhere, watching you from outside. God is the reality in which you are embedded, the reality that constitutes you, the reality that your consciousness participates in making actual through the act of observation that quantum mechanics says is essential for definiteness. You do not pray to God across a distance. You pray within God, as part of God, as a node of consciousness in the infinite field of divine awareness, as the instrument through which the ground of being becomes aware of itself, as the eye through which the universe sees, as the measurement through which the possible becomes actual, as the prayer through which the divine becomes definite. The Chandogya Upanishad says Tat Tvamasi, thou art that. 4 syllables that contain the entire argument of this series. You are the divine. Not you are connected to the divine through some mechanism that we might discover. Not you can communicate with the divine through some channel that science has not yet mapped. You are the divine. The consciousness that prays is the consciousness that is prayed to. The observer is the observed. The eye at the top of Wheeler's U is the Big Bang at the bottom. One reality looking at itself from different positions along the arc of cosmic evolution. One consciousness experiencing itself as many. One ground of being becoming definite through the observations of the beings it produced, for no other purpose than to observe, to measure, to make real, to pray. Now let me be honest one final time, because honesty has been the commitment of this entire series and I will not abandon it at the end. I do not know if prayer works. I do not know if directing consciousness at reality changes reality in the way that prayer claims. I do not know if the parallels between quantum mechanics and contemplative practice are evidence of a real connection or the most sophisticated pattern recognition ever performed by a brain, evolved to see patterns everywhere. I do not know if the mystics discovered quantum reality through contemplation, or if they discovered something else entirely that merely resembles quantum reality when described in certain terms. I do not know if Wheeler's participatory universe is the correct description of reality or an elegant speculation that will be superseded by a better theory. I do not know. But here is what I do know, what the evidence taken as a whole supports, with more force than any individual piece of evidence supports alone. I know that the observer effect is real. That consciousness directed at quantum systems changes those systems. That observation is not passive witnessing, but active participation in the determination of physical outcomes. That before measurement, the quantum world is indefinite, and after measurement, it is definite. And the transition from indefinite to definite requires observation. This is confirmed physics, not speculation, not one interpretation among many. Every interpretation of quantum mechanics agrees that measurement produces definite outcomes from indefinite quantum states. The interpretations disagree about what measurement is. They agree that it does something essential, something without which the quantum world never becomes the classical world we experience. I know that the measurement problem is unsolved, that 90 years of the most brilliant physics in history has not explained what happens when observation occurs. That John von Neumann, the greatest mathematician of the 20th century, concluded that consciousness must be involved. That Eugene Wigner, the Nobel laureate, concluded that consciousness collapses the wave function. That Roger Penrose, the Nobel laureate, believes new physics is needed to explain the role of consciousness in quantum mechanics. that the role of consciousness remains the deepest open question in physics, that dismissing it as irrelevant does not make it irrelevant, that ignoring the measurement problem does not solve the measurement problem. I know that every contemplative tradition on earth reports that directed consciousness has effects on reality, that trained consciousness produces different effects than untrained consciousness, that the quality of awareness matters, that depth of practice matters, that intensity of focus matters, that this is the consistent report of millions of practitioners across thousands of years across every culture on earth, that dismissing all of them as deluded requires an extraordinary claim about the universal failure of human introspective capacity, that the burden of proof for such a claim is as heavy as the burden of proof for the claim that prayer works. I know that the structural parallels between quantum mechanics and contemplative practice are specific, precise, and multiply confirmed across independent traditions. That Dhikr maps onto the Zeno effect with frequency dependence matching. That metta maps onto entanglement with boundary dissolution matching. That contemplative prayer maps onto wave function collapse with three-stage process matching. That mantra maps onto quantum field resonance with vibration as fundamental reality matching. That these correspondences exist between traditions that developed independently on different continents, across different millennia with no knowledge of each other and no knowledge of quantum mechanics. I know that the universe is non-local, that distance-independent correlations are confirmed to exist at the quantum level, that the universe is fundamentally the kind of universe where the prayer claim that distance does not matter is physically possible, that non-locality is not fantasy but confirmed physics. I know that the brain in deep prayer enters a state of maximal focused attention combined with minimal self-other boundary, that this neural configuration would optimize quantum observation if consciousness is involved in observation, that experienced practitioners achieve this state more completely, that the brain physically restructures itself through prayer practice via neuroplasticity, that decades of practice produce measurably different neural architectures. And I know that 2 billion people prayed today, and will pray tomorrow, and have prayed every day for as long as there have been human beings capable of directing consciousness beyond the immediately visible, that this behavior has survived every attempt to explain it away as cognitive error, every attempt to reduce it to evolutionary accident, every attempt to dismiss it as the confused product of hyperactive agent detection. It persists, stubbornly, universally, irrepressibly, in every culture that has ever existed, in every century that has been recorded, in every circumstance that humans have found themselves in, under persecution and in freedom, in poverty and in wealth, in sickness and in health, in the darkest moments of individual suffering and in the brightest moments of collective joy, under regimes that punished it with death, under philosophies that mocked it as delusion, under scientific paradigms that declared it impossible. 2 billion people today closed their eyes and directed consciousness at something beyond the visible. And something happened. In their brains, something changed. In their experience, something shifted. In their sense of connection to something larger, something deepened. Something always changes when consciousness is directed at reality with full attention and clear intention. This is what quantum mechanics says about observation. This is what every contemplative tradition says about prayer. This is what 2 billion people experience today. What changed? I do not know with scientific certainty. Whether the change extends beyond the prayer's own consciousness into the physical world, I cannot prove. Whether prayer alters quantum probabilities in distant systems or only restructures the neural architecture of the brain that prays, I cannot determine. Whether God hears or only the brain's own deep structures listen, I cannot say. Whether the mystics access the same reality as the physicists, or a different reality that coincidentally resembles quantum mechanics in 4 specific ways, I cannot establish beyond doubt. These questions remain open, may always remain open, may be the kind of questions that consciousness can never fully answer about itself because the instrument and the measured quantity are the same thing. The observer cannot fully observe itself without changing itself in the act of observation. The measurer cannot measure the measurement without the measurement becoming different by being measured. The prayer cannot pray about prayer without the prayer and the analysis becoming entangled with each other. And this circularity, this self-reference, this strange loop of consciousness examining consciousness, might be exactly where the answer lives. In the place where the question and the answer are the same act, where the observer and the observed are one reality, where the prayer and what is prayed to are not two entities separated by cosmic distance, but one awareness recognizing itself through the act that it invented for exactly this purpose. Close your eyes again, not for 5 seconds this time, for as long as you want, for as long as feels right. Direct your consciousness at whatever you consider most real, most fundamental, most worthy of your undivided attention. God, if you believe in God, the ground of being, if you prefer philosophical language, the quantum vacuum, if you prefer physics, the mystery, if you prefer honesty, or simply the fact of consciousness itself, the fact that you are aware. That awareness exists, that in this vast, dark, cold, mechanical universe of equations and particles and fields there is this warmth, this light, this knowing, this experiencing, this being present, this extraordinary, impossible, inexplicable fact that there is something it is like to be you. Direct your attention there, at the foundation of your own awareness, at the source of your own experience, at the place where consciousness meets reality, at the place where something meets nothing and the universe begins. You are praying. Whether you call it prayer or meditation or contemplation or mindfulness or just sitting quietly with your eyes closed, whether you believe in God or the quantum vacuum or nothing at all, whether you consider yourself religious or spiritual or materialist or agnostic or none of the above or all of the above, you are directing consciousness at reality. You are performing the fundamental act, the act that the double-slit experiment demonstrates with photons, the act that Wheeler identified as the source of the physical world, the act that quantum mechanics says changes what it is directed at, the act that every contemplative tradition on Earth has practiced and refined and transmitted for millennia, the act that 2 billion people perform today without knowing they were doing physics, without knowing they were participating in the creation of definite reality from quantum possibility, without knowing that the oldest, most universal, most persistent, most ineradicable human behavior might be the most fundamental act in the universe. The universe spent 13.8 billion years producing you, producing this consciousness, producing this awareness that can close its eyes and turn inward and find at the center of itself the same mystery from which the universe emerged. 13.8 billion years of cosmic evolution, of stars forming and dying, of elements being forged in stellar furnaces, of planets coalescing from cosmic dust, of chemistry becoming biology, of biology becoming neurology, of neurology becoming consciousness, of consciousness becoming aware of itself. 13.8 billion years to produce a being that can close its eyes and pray, that can withdraw attention from the visible and direct it at the invisible, that can participate in the act that Wheeler says makes the universe real. Why? Why would a universe spend 13.8 billion years producing beings that close their eyes and direct consciousness at the invisible? If prayer is cognitive error, why did the universe produce beings prone to this specific error with such extraordinary consistency across every culture and century? If prayer is evolutionary accident, why has it survived every selection pressure that should have eliminated a behavior that wastes time and energy on something that does not work? If prayer does nothing, if consciousness directed at reality changes nothing, if the act of observation is irrelevant to the physical world, then the existence of prayer is the greatest waste in evolutionary history. A behavior consuming billions of human hours every day, every year, every century, every millennium, across the entire species, with zero adaptive value. Evolution does not produce this. Evolution does not maintain this. Evolution eliminates behaviors that waste resources on nothing, unless prayer is not nothing, unless the direction of consciousness at reality does something, unless the act that 2 billion people perform today is not waste but work, not error but function, not superstition but participation. You are the eye at the top of Wheeler's U. You are the observer that makes reality definite. You are the consciousness that the universe spent 13.8 billion years producing. You are the measurement that the quantum world requires. You are the prayer, and the prayer is heard. Not because someone is listening from outside the universe, not because a cosmic ear is tuned to the frequency of human supplication, not because a divine customer service representative is processing your request. The prayer is heard because the listening and the praying are the same act, the same consciousness. Plus, the same reality becoming aware of itself through the instrument it spent 13.8 billion years creating, through you, through the nervous system that 4 billion years of evolution sculpted, through the brain that quantum mechanics operates in at every synapse, through the awareness that closes its eyes and discovers at the center of itself the same ground from which the universe emerges, the same field from which all particles arise, the same vacuum from which all reality flows, the same source that the Sufi calls God, and the Buddhist calls emptiness, and the Hindu calls Brahman, and the physicist calls the quantum vacuum, and the honest person calls the mystery. You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean, praying to itself through a drop that it made. To pray